Hey everyone, Ryan the Vintage Viking here. I have my January wrap-up of what books were read during the month of January. If you've watched the previous videos, you've seen that I've started kind of a challenge of 100 plus books to read. I have a total of about 150 on my list right now that are kind of must reads for me. There's tons others I could add there, but I want to get through these ones before I start reading all kinds of other ones. Periodically I add a few more here and there to the list, which is doesn't make it any easier. So here are the books that I finished in the month of January. I'll give you my favorite last, and other than that, there's no really particular order. I pretty much liked all of them. Some were better than others, obviously. This one is a little bit different than the rest of my reads. This one's called Inside Out, and it is stories and poems from an autistic mind by Russell Lehman. It's actually signed, which is kind of cool. This one I picked up, and I found like 3 or 4 signed copies at one place. I don't know why there were so many there, but this one I picked up, and I think I got it for Amazon purposes. Just going through scanning, boop 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 boop, and then as I was getting ready to send them out, I kind of read what it was about, and it really kind of interested me, and I wanted to know, what the whole story was. It's basically his life story as someone who is autistic, telling everything about his life and the struggles that he had and the difficulties and the victories and all this other stuff. And then about halfway through, or maybe 3/4 of the way through, it switches, and it's all his poems that he kept during that time that he'd written, or even after. And so it was a short read. It was a good read, and he even states in the beginning that it's not his writing isn't the best because he struggles with different academic type things, but it was easy to read, and it was smooth, and it felt like it was written very well. So I was happy to read it, and I actually read it all in one sitting without even setting it down. So it was great, and it was worth. If this is something that interests you, or maybe you're familiar with somebody who has autism, I have worked with youth a lot, so periodically I'll have different youths that are on varying parts of the spectrum. So it is nice to know even more in depth into what they struggle with, what goals they have, what victories they've overcome or want to overcome. And so it's really a great insight, and I would highly recommend it if this is your kind of thing. So that was excellent. It is Inside Out by Russell Lehman. So part of what I want to do is go through at least one Stephen King book a month, because I have a lot of his that I haven't read, and I really enjoy Stephen King. I have pretty much everything. I'm missing a few. And so I want to at least read one Stephen King book a month to make sure I'm moving through them. I was kind of thinking I'd read at least one good horror, one good Stephen King, at least one vintage sci-fi, and maybe try to find something newer sci-fi in there too. So those are kind of my temporary goals for monthly reading. But I read Colorado Kid by Stephen King. This is a hard case crime. Here's the alternate cover. Ooh, there's the alternate cover for you if you're looking for it. These are, you can tell by this little hard case crime at the top there. Lots of these are written by authors under pseudonyms, so it'll say the real author's name, and then it'll say written as so and so. They're just crime stories basically, and Stephen King has 3 of them. He has Joyland, Colorado Kid, and Later, and I believe this was the first one of the 3. First one, then Joyland, then Later, I believe. I think Later's pretty recent. I just found out. I thought it was older, but it's I think it was 2020 or something. So this was okay. Kind of a crime story. It was enjoyable. It was kind of like a whodunit. This one's illustrated, so it's kind of neat. It gives it even a little bit more added to it. It was just mediocre in my opinion, so I didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. If I was giving it out of a 10-star rating, it'd be like a 4. I don't know. I'm not good at rating. Anyways. All right, next up I read A Case of Conscience by James Blish. This is part of a 4-part series. They're kind of loosely tied together, I think. There's Dr. Moralibus is the next one, then Black Easter, and then Day of Judgment at the end. I have Black Easter and Day of Judgment in one volume, and that is a part of my list to read, but I kind of wanted to read the other 2 first. Dr. Moralibus is a little bit expensive to find, so I was kind of hoping I'd find it before I was done with this one, but I probably will have to order it. So this was pretty good. It was hard to get into. I mean, even at the beginning, this has a pronunciation key, so you know how to pronounce all the words that are written in it. So how to say Gleshtek. As indicated with the guttural G, the fish church middle consonants, and the mute H throwing the K back against the soft palate. Does that help? No, it doesn't help. It makes it difficult to read. But anyway, it was decent. It was hard to follow at the beginning, but then it picks up, I'd say, probably, about a third of the way through. Basically, they're on a planet. This guy's like a priest that's on this planet. There's these Lithians. There's these big creatures here, and they live on this planet, and the planet is very pure. There's no sin there. There's no wrongdoing there. There's things like that, and the struggle for the priest is, should we bring stuff in and corrupt it? And because much like the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, sin corrupted everything. So there's this idea that if we come in, we're gonna be like sin and corrupt everything. And so he's wrestling with that. Then the story kind of shifts to another place and then shifts back, and so there's a lot of back and forth there. But I think the main chunk of it is his kind of beginning struggle with it. So it's pretty good. There's a lot, if you're not a Christian or you're not familiar with biblical terms or theology in any way, there's a lot of references in here that you're probably not going to get. If you're familiar with some theological terms or you've studied in any way Christianity or religious systems or things like that, you'll pick up on more of it, I think. So it didn't make me go, man, I can't wait to read the next one. Next up, I read Time Machine by H.G. Wells. This is a classic. There's a room full of guys where the time traveler is telling this story that's gone on, and in a way trying to convince them about what happened to him. And he tells about how he discovers a people group and his adventures there and how he survived. So it's very good. There was a little bit, I thought it was going to be a little more childish, a little bit more YA, but there was some grittiness to it. It wasn't quite like, it wasn't like a Mary Poppins kind of, I'm stupid. It wasn't like really childish. It wasn't like what you would expect from like a children's book, which I kind of had in my head that it was more like a children's story. I was going to read something like, Robinson Crusoe or, Swiss Family Robinson or something, I don't know. But it was a little more gritty than that, and it was good. And there was a little bit deeper themes in there than some of those other books. So worth reading. Definitely a classic and a must read. Did it knock my socks off? No. Has it stuck with me and have I been thinking about it constantly since then? Periodically, but not really. So, all right. So I had a couple Peter Straubs on the list, and one is Shadowland. I have Ghost Story on there as well that I want to read, and I may have one or two more. I've heard great things about Peter Straub. This was a very interesting book. It's more fantasy and magic than I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be very dark and more like a horror. If you're, reading the back, it's got Stephen King's thing. I thought it was creepy from page 1, and I loved it. So I thought, okay, it might be a little creepy. I mean, just this implies like some kind of horror to it, but it was more fantasy and magic than anything else. There wasn't really any horror, I would say. So I thought that's what it was going to be. I was definitely wrong. Just to spoil something here, I also read Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King, and these are kind of close in a way, in a strange way. So Shadowland, the ultimate masterpiece of modern horror. No, it wasn't. So don't go into it if you're going to read it, don't go in expecting this is some crazy horror novel. The basic premise is about a kid and another kid that go to this school, and there's a lot that goes on with them. They're trying to figure things out. Some strange stuff is happening. The story shifts. There's like 3 parts, and they kind of split well. Like they're made to be like they shift really nicely into another part. Sometimes you get books where the parts are like part 1 and then part 2 is like a whole another story, and you got to figure everything out again, and you got to get through it and discover what's going on. Part 1, part 2, and part 3 all kind of blended very nicely together, so it was easy to read. The book's very easy to read, and it's written very well. I can see why Peter Straub is a great author, and I'm looking forward to other books that he's written. I don't want to spoil any of the book, and I'm not good at doing these reviews and knowing what is a spoiler and what's not. So it's a good book. It is not a horror, and I wouldn't go into it expecting it to be a horror, but rather like maybe you could say dark fantasy, or fantasy with magic or something like that. It was good, worth reading. Made me look forward to his other books. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Let's go with Genocides by Thomas Dish. Check out this cover. It's such a cool cover. This one from page 1, I knew I was going to like it. That doesn't happen very often. I opened the book and read the first page, and I was, okay, I like this a lot. I very much love the way Thomas Dish writes. He's probably become one of my more favorite, probably one of my favoritist. He's an author I like. I really enjoyed it. This is easy to follow, easy to read, easy to know what's going on. Plants have basically taken over the world. There's these weird alien ball type things that come down. The whole story follows around, for the most part, one little group of people and what they have going on. If you want a good review, Juan over at Plagued by Visions did a good review of this. Matt Bookpilled has done a good review on this. So those are some better reviews for you. But all in all, I really enjoyed it. The premise is good. The story is good. The writing is good. The characters are good. You see a bunch of religious wackadoodles, the typical fashion of some, this is how always, someone who is a Bible believer, is played out. There's some sort of religious wackadoodle who's imposing his own ideas and beating people with the supposed truth, that he's portraying, taking, stuff out of context and using it to abuse people. So that's kind of the typical bad guy type thing. I wouldn't say he was the bad guy of the story, but he was a bad guy in the story. That stuff kind of it's so dumb, and it really bothers me because it's not true. And yes, it happens, and people do get abused and are abusers, but it's not the truth. It's worth reading. It does have some elements of weirdness. Is it horrific? No. Is it intense? At times. Are there things that go on that are elements of disgustingness? Yes. They're limited though. It's not the whole book. It was quite enjoyable though. Can't wait to read more Thomas Dish. So this one I would give a 9. Worth reading, worth picking up. All right, next, I don't have one with the dust jacket, unfortunately, but Eyes of the Dragon, Stephen King. So like I said, I want to read more Stephen King. I want to add at least one to the list to read every week. Look at this cover art, or interior cover art. It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. And so there are some great illustrations throughout and give you some idea of what's going on. So they're kind of nice to read through, and you can see. This was really good. I really enjoyed it. Probably one of my favorites of his. This is completely different than everything else. I've heard that Fairy Tale is sort of similar, and so I kind of want to pick that one up next. This is a fairy tale. It's told from a narrator's perspective of a fairy tale. It is a magical land, and there's a family that's followed, and a magician and things like that. I don't want to spoil anything if it's a spoiler. I don't know if it is. There's some things in here that have to do with other Stephen King books. How about that? It's very well done. It's very well written. It's Stephen King flair to a fairy tale. Super easy to read. Some of the chapters are like literally like 3 sentences long, which is kind of crazy. If you have a chapter goal to read every day, some like this, chapter 44, it's like, oh, I'm done with the chapter. Cool. But makes it really easy to read. It's enjoyable, really enjoyable. So I want to find a copy with a nice dust jacket on it. Although this one is in pristine condition otherwise on the inside of the pages. So worth reading. Eyes of the Dragon. If you're into fairy tale fantasy stuff and you love Stephen King and his writing, you'll love this. You'll love it. Okay, next one on the list is The Cipher by Kathy Koja. This book is not for everybody. This is not, I don't know if is it classified as horror? It was twisted, I guess, but it wasn't horrific. I don't know what this is classified under. If you're sensitive to anything, don't read this. At the very beginning, I could hardly understand the flow of how things were said, because it was there were so many commas. It was just like comma, 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 and I'm going, what is going on? It felt like a ton of incomplete sentences, like strung together, and it takes a while to get into, for me at least, to get into the reasoning for that, or the way that's making the character kind of try to come out off the page type thing. It changes and it stops being so sporadic, or I just became so comfortable with it I didn't catch it anymore. So after about a couple chapters, it seemed to tone down and I could read it easier. Once that happened, then I could read it. Then it just breezed through like it was nothing, and it was easy to read. That may just be me, and that may be a writing style I'm not familiar with or used to. So whatever, it was enjoyable to read through. I think there was a bunch of stuff that was added in that was really unnecessary and didn't really fit certain things. It was just thrown in there to be shock value or something like that, and didn't add to it, but kind of took away a little bit. I was like, not necessary. You could have skipped that whole entire chunk of writing right there, and it wouldn't have affected the story at all. The story was great. It moved along. I wanted more from the story. I wanted to know more about what was going on, and I wanted more insight into what was happening. It's like pulling you along, but slowly giving you details, slowly giving you more info. And that's probably part of the horror part of it, is that you're just needing to know more and what's going on and what's going to happen. But I enjoyed it enough to want to read more of her books. I have heard there's a couple others that are better. And so I have those ones, and I'm a little bit unsure of whether the shock value is going to go up or whether the shock value is going to tone down, because this was our first book. So sometimes people ride that shock value wave and they make it even worse and try to like throw it out of space, you know. And sometimes they go, okay, I learned that wasn't needed. I can write better things without having to do that. So we'll see. I'm not sure. So I have a couple more of hers on my list. But it was worth reading. This is definitely not for everybody. The number one book that I read this month. I read Old Man's War by John Scalzi. I absolutely loved this book. This book was phenomenal for me. I did not expect to enjoy a military sci-fi so much, and I ran through this like it was nothing, and I loved it. I loved it, and I hated the fact that it was over, and then I was so happy to find out that there's 6 more books, and there's like other ones that tie into it, and I was just fantastic. I hope the rest of the books are just as good. I mean, I have probably 5 of the 6 of them already. I've sold this one like 10 times, and I never even realized how good it was. The writing, the humor, the character, there's a lot of older references in it. Oh, by the way, Shadowland has tons of old 50s, 60s references, maybe even a little earlier than that. So if you're not familiar with stuff, if you don't know any of those things, they're referencing constantly that you aren't going to pick up on them, and it's going to be kind of tough. Anyways, back to Old Man's War. There's some great references in this one. The main character is like 75, so he's an older, gritty kind of guy. The story just moves along great. There's a lot that you don't expect. There's a lot of kind of, what you would expect in a book doesn't happen kind of thing, and it's got some great movement to it. I highly, highly, highly recommend this one. I loved every bit of it. I guess I could tell you the basic premise. The basic premise is when people hit the age of 75, they can enlist or sign up to enlist at 75 into a military camp of sorts. I don't know, into the military, a different kind of military, an outer world military. And they don't really know anything about it. From their perspective, they've never met anybody who's been part of this military. They've just known people who go off to war. And they assume that this is all happening in the very first couple chapters. They assume that they wouldn't want to hire people who are 75 because they're kind of older and can't fight battles very well. So they assume that what they do is they fix up their body kind of thing, give them new parts. And so that's their assumption going into it, that they can go into it, they can live longer or die in the battle, but they have kind of some updated appendages and things like that. So that's the people's presumption when they go to sign up for this. The thing is, they have to leave everything and everyone behind, and they will never return again. And they don't really know where they're going or what's happening. There's just that hope of some stuff happening that's good. And the main character, he basically, it starts off right away where he's going in to sign up, and it tells you a little bit about his story and his life, and then from there on, it's what happens to him and all those that he knows. So it's a good read. This one for me was an easy 10. I continuously have been thinking about it and excited to read the next ones and excited to talk about this one. And so this one is up there as the numero uno book that I read this month. Probably the numero uno book I've read in a long time, to be honest. And I just heard that Netflix picked up the rights to doing this as a movie or series. I can't remember. And as I'm reading it, I'm going, why in the world has no one ever made this into a freaking TV show? This would be phenomenal. Although whenever they try and do that, they usually suck. I hope it's really good. But Netflix picked it up. it was picked up by somebody else, and they held on to it for a while, never did anything with it, and then Netflix just recently did. And I have read another military sci-fi since then, and it wasn't as good. So that's it for the month. So in February, I will go ahead and give you another wrap up of the books that were read during February. Right now, I'm on pace to do 100 by the end of the year. So if I do about 8 a month with a couple extra thrown in, I'll be good. So I got through 9 this month, and I'm on track to finish another 8 or so by the end of February. And I get to go away at some point for a couple days, so I'm gonna be reading. So that's kind of exciting. Right on. I will catch you guys next time. Appreciate you. Thank you for stopping in. I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button and some likes. Throw some comments in of what books you read this month, or maybe, I don't know, what your thoughts are on some of these books, that if you've read them. And I'd love to hear from you guys and sharing some of that. So, all right. Take care. Talk to you next time.